Have you gone to post-secondary school and feel that the education you received didn't prepare you for real life? Show of hands, please. How many of you know someone who is in post-secondary education right now who feel the education they're receiving is not relevant to real life? Show of hands. Last question. And how many of you sat in a similar way as you are now, facing the front of the room and looking at someone else's back as if you're going to be entertained? What you and I experienced, including the way in which administrators organize and structure the classroom, is reflective of colonialism. I didn't like it much, so I am on a quest to transform post-secondary education classrooms. I'm going to be talking with you about why it is important to decolonize and transform those colonial spaces, and how we can do that together. And now you're sitting wondering, what does that have to do with you, right? Come, I'll show you. But first, what is colonized education? In a colonized educational space, the classroom is structured to locate the professor at the front of the room, where all eyes are on them, and they're the focus of attention, presumably because they're the experts. And an interesting note, statistics tell us that those experts, they tend to present as heterosexual, white men and women for the most part. And they tend to have course content that is narrowly focused on their own lived experience, which is based on a Eurocentric perspective. Students, on the other hand, are presumed to have little or no agency to contribute to their education, the education of other students, and of the professors or teachers. They're located in the classroom as voyeurs, audience members, spectators, and bystanders. They're taught to memorize and regurgitate everything that they're told in the classroom. So you can see how the education is a one-way street from the professor to the student, because, after all, students are merely empty vessels, gracing the hallowed halls of academe, waiting to be filled with knowledge. So why do we need to transform these colonial spaces? Well, they simply fail to recognize that today's post-secondary school students come from a rich array of backgrounds with unique ideas, perspectives, goals, and aspirations. Remember at the beginning of my talk, I asked you what your experience was in post-secondary classrooms, and specifically about the shape of the classroom and the education you received. And you agree that some things didn't work for you and for some people that you know. And that is why we need to transform those spaces to make them relevant for students to learn about complex ideas and subjects. But we should not be fooled in thinking that this education is meant for people like you or I or children or grandchildren. No, they were not. They were made by and for a small group of elites who construct this space for themselves. And that is why post-secondary classrooms actually does not work for students at the moment. So what can we do about some of those spaces? Given that students have different learning styles and needs, this colonial space does not work for a majority of them. And when it doesn't work, they're often pathologized and not given the foundation for success. This kind of post-secondary education squeezes students into corners and boxes and limits their scope of learning. This kind of education is akin to giving students coffee beans and asking them or expecting them to make coffee without any water. And as coffee drinkers know, that is a recipe for disaster. So what can we do about today's post-secondary education classrooms? The same ones that are not relevant for the average post-secondary student. The same one that does not prepare the average student to take on 21st century issues such as global warming, child exploitation, racism, gender equity, and a host of other social ills. Wouldn't it be great to see this kind of education space transformed and decolonized? Transform rather than change. That is because I'm being intentional. And I'll give you an example of why intentionality is really important here. We can take water and turn it into ice. We can take that ice and turn it back into water. Would you agree that's an example of change? So I'm focused in on transformation because when the current post-secondary education classroom is transformed, it will never be what it used to be. And if this is sounding a little incredible or improbable, let's just slow things down a bit, because when you slow things down, gives us an opportunity to peel back the layers and to see things a little differently. One of those things that we can see is the great Paulo Freire, who taught us some basic things about how we can achieve this goal of educational transformation. And he said, education should not be a spectator sport. And I would add that our post-secondary classrooms should not be structured like tennis stadiums. You get the drift. In a transformational classrooms, the professor would recognize their power and privilege and transform the space, providing the opportunity for students to contribute to their own learning and how their learning unfolds. And you're probably wondering, how the heck can this happen? You know what you experience in your classrooms. Actually, very easy and simple. 4 little things that every teacher or professor in post-secondary education can do right now to begin this transformation process. 1, they can disrupt the classroom space by adjusting the structure and the organization of the class by sitting amongst the students. 2, they can share power with students by having students contribute to every single part of their education, including curricula. 3, they can challenge this notion of a single expert by relinquishing their power and demonstrating that they're not the only knowledge holder in the room. The 4th thing that professors can do is be facilitators, guides, and coaches that moves around the room and help with knowledge mobilization. When this happens, the professors or the teachers signal a respect and an acceptance for students' experience and the knowledge that they bring inside the classroom. And they would also signal their commitment to student-centered learning. Students, on the other hand, would be the center of their education. They would be encouraged and feel empowered to direct and control their own learning. They would be teachers and learners, so the communication would be two ways. In those roles, they would share their ideas to help everyone in the classroom learn, including those expert professors at the front, formally at the front. They would be located in groups to engage in activities where they get introduced to theory, develop their understanding, develop lifelong relationships, and learn to embrace collaborative learning. This learning would be reciprocal amongst the students, the teachers, and the community, where students would partner with community-based organizations to help apply their theory to practice and learn by expanding their knowledge through a community-engaged, student-centered, social justice-oriented perspective. When people of unique backgrounds work together in the classroom, a richness unfolds that is reflective of and responsive to our global society. And what I'm talking about is a society that includes various perspectives, ideologies, and attitudes. Ultimately, education must motivate students to be their best selves, to develop their independence, to think outside of the box, and to develop their capacity for critical thinking. This way, we can have a society that is based on a complex understanding of a social justice practice at its core. This is where, remember when I asked you, I said what you were wondering how this has to do with you. This is your part. Call to action. You can help with this kind of transformation by unequivocally demanding this type of education for yourself and for others that you know. And if you or anyone you know is ever privileged to be in one of these spaces, know that it can seem a little messy because it's different from the norm. This is not what you're used to. But it is well worth the ride to experience the rainbow at the end of this journey. And in this space, students can expand on their rockstar qualities because, after all, every student is a rock star.